Humanity sets the agenda.
The time is just gone 9:31 a.m. as we continue with the broadcast this morning right here on News and Views. And it's time now to unpack the Bela Bill. Now, BELA, this bill obviously aims to bring education laws in line with court judgments, update the law so that it is more relevant to the current needs of our learners and the sector in general. And there are certain concerns that have been raised, especially with regard to some of the provisions which are of concern. And this morning, we are unpacking this with Elizabeth Biney, head of research at Equal Education. Elizabeth, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning and thanks for having us. Good morning
Elizabeth,
to you.
just for the purpose of our listeners and our viewers this morning, just to unpack what is this Bella Bill about, just a brief understanding before we continue getting into certain specifics.
All right, so the Bela Bill Amendment is essentially a piece of law that tries to coordinate and bring all the other pieces of law that governs schooling in the country in line with the Constitution and obviously reflecting the realities and the needs of the sector and learners in the 21st century. So it's not one law that is for all schools. It's a law that tries to bring different pieces of laws together and to harmonize them in a more logical way, so to speak.
Well, Well, thank you for that. And obviously, that summarizes it just so beautifully to give us an overview and an understanding. But it is clear that as equal education, you have raised certain concerns with regard to the bill. And at the same time, while you still welcome, some of the issues that are contained in the bill, there are certain concerns on your part.
Yes, and I mean, we need to, at the onset, establish that as an education activist and as an organization working for equal and quality education in the country, the primary concern is that learners' rights are protected at all costs, but also within the changes of any law that governs schooling and the rights of learners. The social context of these school communities and learners are taken into consideration so that in trying to govern or regulate these areas or this very important social good, we do not inadvertently create more inequality within the sector. And so for us, while we think that the law is important in trying to obviously upgrade and also to bring education into the 21st century, some of the provisions, especially those on the criminalization of parents and caregivers with regards to falsification of documents for admissions purposes, and obviously the criminalization of caregivers who prevent learners from going to school, we find it's a little bit too excessive. Not to say we condone illegal activity or wrongdoing, but I think those provisions could be balanced with a more humanistic and social understanding of some of the deep root causes that lead some parents or some caregivers to not meet the legal standard as required. And there needs to be some sort of flexibility and assistance built into the system to make sure that these parents who are in all intents and purposes struggling to provide quality education for their wards are able to do so without the unnecessary or excessive sort of pressure and criminalization that is put into the legal system to essentially also in deterrence, it's creating an added burden to them. So those for us are very important things because invariably it affects marginalized communities and disadvantaged parents from rural and very difficult backgrounds, and not necessarily your affluent community. So we need to create a balance so that we are not in a sense increasing or perpetuating the inequalities within the sector further.
Yes, Elizabeth, often we see in this country, we actually one thing we're very good at is legislation in terms of coming up with legislation, but there are practical aspects of the legislation in terms of implementation, like, for instance, the Bella Bill. And earlier on, I was talking about the criminal mafia, and this is exactly what my guest had said, that we've got brilliant legislation, some of the best legislation in the world. But we certainly have got huge concerns. We've got huge problems with regard to practical implementation of legislation. And I would say that the Bella Bill would be exactly the same.
I mean, it seems a little bit pessimistic to start off with that sort of premise, but yes, we do have an issue of implementation in the sector, as it is elsewhere in other departments in the society or in the country. But what is important for us to realize is that we all have a duty in ensuring that implementation happens and happens properly, right? So while there are certain provisions that are great and we welcome them and we want to see them happen in reality, there are also conditions, political will, um, different agendas or sort of ideas that these implementers or departments who are mandated to implement these legislations might have that will hinder the smooth running of it. And so there's a sense that we need to monitor it. We need to monitor implementations on the ground at the school level, district level, provincial level, and national level to make sure that the rights of marginalized communities and learners are not being violated either by negligence, ignorance, or just plain avoidance or unimplementation of these policies. And in areas or in provisions that are overly critical or tend to be very criminal intent, we need to also monitor to make sure that they are not being disproportionately applied in these communities. Hence, it will create inequality within the sector further. So yes, implementation is always difficult for us, but I think it requires oversight from broader society, civil society, organizations such as ourselves, and parents also, because these are the people who are very close to the issues because their children are in schools and the issues or the policies affect their wards directly.
Yes, Elizabeth, we've seen criticism leveled against this bill as well, as some have actually called it draconian, and saying that this is some sort of bullying into submission, and also at the same time expressing concerns. And you mentioned civil society, you speak of all the organizations, the lack of public participation. And this obviously cannot be ignored, because it is about yourself, myself, it is about the public, it is about parents, it's about learners, it's about school governing bodies also that are going to be impacted by this bill.
Well, you see, because of the nature of this specific piece of law, it's very difficult to obviously bring in or reflect everybody's opinion, desires, wants, wishes, because it's not, it's not just one thing. It is regulating a series of other pieces of legislation or law. And so I think this is probably one of the most highly contested and debated amendment bill in the sector that we've ever had. The process took or was extended for a lot longer than other processes took. There were a lot of efforts on the part of the portfolio committee and even the Department of Basic Education to try and get as much public participation and public voices into the process as possible. But at the end of the day, we cannot please everyone, right? So if you look at the statement we put out, we've had and we've highlighted some of the gains or the wins that we felt were important. We raised in our submissions and we saw it reflected in the final draft. But there are other things that we also didn't get. I'm sure other organizations probably got everything or nothing at all. So it's a very difficult process to try and bring all those different opinions into a piece of law that will be flawless, and the opinions were quite divergent on certain areas or certain issues. And so we think while the bill is not on the whole perfect, it is in the current state or in the current version that we have, is something we can live with, and its swift implementation or finalization is needed because it has taken many years for us to get to this stage. We cannot prolong the situation further. So there needs to be a compromise between the people who have strong views and the policymakers. And I think we are at a stage where the compromise can be concluded. We've seen enough progress in the bill that we think we can live with, but it is obviously not a finished, perfect thing. And that is what laws are. We have opportunities to change them at a later stage as well. So we don't have to sit here with another 5, 10 years debating issues in there when we can actually have it rolled out and then see how it rolls. It plays out practically in reality in the school communities, and then have another opportunity to change and strengthen it.
Well, Elizabeth, just finally, I accept the fact that there has got to be a compromise, and this bill is absolutely important. It is critical, but also at the same time, some are saying that it's around here to take care of some of the administrative concerns, and also there has been some sort of concern raised, particularly looking at heads of provincial governments and making them both players and referees who could abuse their power to further destroy what they call quality education.
Well, I would not venture to give you a very clever opinion in this debate, but we also need to be mindful that education departments have been mandated. They are the primary custodians when it comes to the provision of education services, and so there needs to be a way that they play a more significant role in the process. Not to say that everything must be left to them and that they are the beginning and end of every decision. But with the sort of empowerment of the role of the school governing bodies in this piece of law, and in alignment with jurisprudence or court rulings about the role of SGBs and how they can help improve quality education and decision making in at the school level. I think the bill has tried to create a balancing act while recognizing the mandate of heads of department or provincial education departments, and also the role that parents and community members through the SGB model play in managing and governing schools. So I don't know what the debate is about or where the contention is, but we think there's a fair balancing that is being introduced in this final bill, and we will only have to wait and see if the implementation or the rollout goes according to our reading or assessment.
Well, thank you very much for that, Elizabeth, and for your time. We do appreciate you taking time out talking to us this morning. All the best to you.
Thank you for having us. Have a good day.
Head of Research at Equal Education, Elizabeth Biney, was us this morning. And we're going to go for a break. We come back. We've got final interview this morning with a community activist, Bridget Manek.